Welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over form elements. We're going to be focused on the input elements, input and text area elements. I'm currently in the app builder. I'm going to go ahead to the left panel and go into the elements tab and head over to the form section. Here I can see my form elements. I can see my input and text area elements. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop them into my form. The reason why we're going to be going over these two at the same time is because they are very similar in their behavior. And so I feel like we can cover these two in one video. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and make this look slightly better. Just add some margin, center it, and then we can go into some of the details of these two elements. All right, so I'm just going to add some margin at the bottom, center it. And I'm going to do the same thing with our text area. Just center it. All right. So now that we have our two elements on the page, now let's go over the attributes. All right. So here, from top to bottom, we're just going to go over the attributes really quickly. We have our app data field, right? So this is basically the field in our app data that binds to this input element. Now, by default, the system is going to pick the ID of the element to be the app data field. You can change this by just simply clicking into it and changing it to whatever you want it to be. And we're going to go over that in just a second. Then we have manage data flow, right? So by default, manage data flow is false. And this means that the system automatically handles the way data is binded between form elements and the system. Now, if you wanted to do something more advanced, you could always decouple this and manage the data flow yourself. Now, if you were to, let's say, manage it yourself, then you would also have to provide the value for your input elements, right? And you're going to have to handle the data entry using an unchanged event. So you don't have to do all of that if you just leave it at the default and let the system basically manage the data flow for you. Then we have our type. Right? By default, text areas are always text, whereas inputs can have multiple types. So the default is text, but you can always change this to a number, right? Now it's a number input. You can change this to a date. Now it's a date input, right? You can change this to a color. Now it's a color picker. You can change this to an email, password. Now it's a password input. You can change this to a telephone, and you can change this to like a date time. Right? Now, the thing about this element is also a script user interface. So this can be changed dynamically based on some logic in your application. And this is the same with everything in this application, right? All right, so let's switch this back over to just our text, right? Now, the value, this is basically the value in the inputs if you are managing the data flow yourself. So you have to provide the value. The title is just a standard HTML title attributes. The placeholder, just a standard placeholder attributes. So I'm going to actually just change this here to name. Trigger updates on blur, right? We have these two attributes here. These are two custom attributes, trigger updates on blur and lag time. So these two help do one specific thing. They help to basically manage performance. So if you had an application that had a ton of elements and you wanted to prevent re-renders, right, while people are typing in these inputs, you can basically do one of two things. You could basically increase the lag time. Like for now, as you can see, it's 500 milliseconds. So this just simply means that after a user stops typing, after 500 milliseconds, whatever they have entered then gets set to our app data, right? Or if you are managing the data flow, after 500 milliseconds, then your unchanged event will trigger. That's pretty much what this lag time means. And it's useful when you have a large application and you do not want to have a refresh on every single stroke of the keyboard. You want it to have some lag there. Now, if you don't want to have this experience, you can opt for a different one, which is the trigger updates on blur. What this means is that as long as the user is focused on an element and the type, the updates are never sent out to the application. They only get sent out to the application when the element loses focus. So whenever you click out of it. So that's pretty much what these two things are. And they are really just here for performance optimizations. Now, you have the autocomplete, the autofocus, disabled, read-only, max length, size, required. So these are all your standard HTML form elements. Now we have another one here called non-reactive. So what this basically means is that we do not want this element to react to data changes. We're going to cover this in our performance optimization videos, but basically, again, this is for performance optimizations when you have massive applications and maybe you have certain elements that you do not want to always have that refresh, that re-render whenever data changes. You want to just say, well, manage that this should be non-reactive. All right. Now let's basically type something here and see how this managed data flow or this unmanaged data flow works. So I'm going to just type ABC, and I can see here that my input 4, if I were to look for that input 4 in my app data, I would see that it has that text ABC. All right. I'm going to go ahead and change that to change our app data field for our inputs to name, just to match our placeholder. All right. And I'm going to just type in Michael. I'm going to go back into my live app data, and I can see that the name is now, there's a field called name, and I can see Michael, the text I just typed into that input already there. So as you can see, the binding is so seamless and it's very easy. All you just need to do is point and the system will resolve. What if you wanted to do this with a data structure that is like an object? All right. So I can basically say something like maybe address dot line 1. All right. So here you see I'm using dot notation. Now the system is smart enough to find an address object and find the line 1 field. Now, if an address object does not exist, the system is also smart enough to create one. So I'm just going to say here, 300 Main Street. If I were to go into my app data and scroll down, I should see a new address object with a line 1 field that says 300 Main Street. Right, so the system will resolve this. What if it was, let's say, an array? So addresses, and let's say we were trying to go into our index 0, and then go into address, then go into line 1. I'm just doing it to show you how crazy it can get and how advanced the system is. So if I start typing again, 300 Main Street. Now, obviously, I don't have an addresses array, but the system basically is going to go ahead and create this data structure because it does not exist, right? So I have the addresses 0, address line 1, all right? So let's exit out of all of this and just take this back to what it was, name. All right, and the same applies to our text area. We're just going to call this description and give it a placeholder of description. All right. So while building your applications, if you were to, let's say, have some logic to make this disabled, right? If it was disabled, as you can see, you can't click into it. If it's read-only, the same thing. If you added like max length, that would apply. If you wanted to make this non-reactive, that would apply as well. All right. So for the most part, we have covered the flow for the unmanaged path. All right. So let's quickly cover what it would look like if you were trying to handle the data binding by yourself without the system. All right. So I'm going to do this for our input. All right. And just to show this properly, I am going to also bind our description to the name. All right, so these 2 points to the same data, but I'm going to go ahead and update and add the binding to the managed flow for our input. All right, so I'm going to go over here in our attributes and I'm going to say that I want to manage this flow myself. All right, so because I'm doing this, I have to provide a function for the onChange event. I am then going to go into my functions and go write one. All right. So here I can basically, let's see, create a new function. I could do that. And I could say basic inputs on change. All right. Updates app data on inputs change. All right. So there are many ways to do this. There are simpler ways of doing this, but we're just going to use this way. I will show you a different way of doing it. All right. That is quite simpler. All right. So I'm going to just add a step. As you can see, we have a default parameter called events target value. So this is going to be the value of our inputs, right? I'm going to go ahead and create two parameters, or just one parameter actually. I'm just going to call this app data field. All right. This is going to be a string by default. And all we're going to do here is just update the client app data. And we're just going to bind our app data field parameter with our event value. All right. I'm going to save this. I'm going to deploy basic input on change. I'm going to come over here and just type that in. Basic inputs on change. It's going to ask for the app data field, and I'm just going to say that I want this to be binded to our name app data field. And that's it. So now when I type Michael, as you can see, it showed up in our text area. Now you notice that I typed in Michael and it showed up in our text area because our text area is binded to the name field, but it did not show up over here. And this is because we are managing the data flow, we have to also provide the value. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to use code for this. Open this up and I'm just going to say parameter dot app underscore data dot name lowercase. All right. And now we have a two-way binding that we've done by ourselves. All right. And let me just extend that name. And as you can see, we have that little 500 millisecond lag. If I were to demo out, if I were to say I want this to change on blur, then I could basically turn that on. And I could just add a last name, Michael Johnson Ronald. All right, so now you see nothing happens. But when I click out of it, then the update comes true. All right. So this is pretty much a standard introduction to inputs. We've gone over how inputs are binded. We've gone over the managed and unmanaged data flow. We've seen how to use events to manage data entry if we were trying to manage the whole process ourselves. And we've gone over the attributes. We've gone over some concept with regards to performance optimizations like trigger, update on blur, and lag time. So that will be it for this video. See you in the next one.